All right, joining us now. You hear her everywhere now. Depending if you're watching softball on any platform on ESPN platforms, you probably have heard this voice. She just got finished to a call into a part of the analyst role for the Central Arkansas game, where Central Arkansas pulled off the win on Tuesday night. She does Central Arkansas games. You've seen her on Arkansas broadcasts on SEC Network Plus. She's done some Kentucky games. You may have seen her from time to time. We'll let her explain where, because she's everywhere. Former Virginia Tech player and obviously commentator now, Dorian Craft, joining us for the first time here on In the Circle. That may not have been the greatest introduction, but if I go through the entire list of stuff you're doing, we may never get to the interview.
Well, you got all of the schools with the exception of Missouri State. I'm doing a couple games for Missouri State this year. We had one canceled due to the weather last week, but getting to as many schools as possible around the area. So
that's pretty good. We're going to definitely dive into a lot of that and how you make that work, because I have enough problems figuring out one team schedule on my own. You're trying to handle a bunch of schedules. But I want to ask you, obviously, first, the big story on Tuesday nights. You obviously were on the broadcast, Central Arkansas beating Arkansas again for the second time in front of a record crowd there. What was your thoughts? What's your takeaway now after digesting that game as Central Arkansas once again shuts down Arkansas's pitching with the shutout? This time it was Beaver, and that 1-2 punch of Johnson and Beaver continues to be a big story here for UCA, which is becoming now more of a national story as people get to know him.
Well, I thought Kayla Beaver was phenomenal. She had 8 strikeouts against one of the top offenses, not just in the SEC, but the country. Obviously, Central Arkansas coming in with a better overall team ERA than Arkansas. It was 1.65 coming into yesterday's game. That's top 10 in the nation. And so for me, coming into that matchup, it actually wasn't kind of that David versus Goliath that I think a lot of people who aren't quite as familiar with the sport are looking at it just based on the rankings and the conference and the school name, because those two programs have played each other so tight over the last 5 years, or 3 years rather, 6 games now in the series since they started playing in 2021. The average margin of victory for Arkansas in those games was just 1.6 runs. That's how close it's been played. The first game was 4-1. That was back in Conway in 2021. I called that game alongside Brett Dolan. And then last night's game was 4-0. Everything else has been 1-2 runs. So I expected a tight game. While Central Arkansas played incredibly well, the Bears took advantage of the opportunities that they had. I do think Arkansas is going to go back and look at that game and say, hey, we had missed opportunities, because the truth is that UCA scored all of their runs coming off of errors made by Arkansas. A very uncharacteristic poor defensive game. The throw that got behind Lauren Kamenzen just took her eye off the ball as it was coming in for Hannah Gamble. The throw from Natalia Rio in the 6th inning was a little bit high. Halverson wasn't able to collect it. Central Arkansas, a very aggressive base running team, so really tried to apply that pressure. And obviously, as we know, softball is a game of making timely hits and making the most of your opportunities. And Central Arkansas, at the end of the day, did that better.
Let me ask you about Central Arkansas. Now people are starting to get familiar with them. What was the expectations going into the season? I know there were some pundits that thought, hey, this team could be a sleeper in the A-Sun and maybe challenge Liberty, who was the preseason favorite, has been the defending champions in the A-Sun. Those two teams haven't played yet, but now people are starting to take notice of Central Arkansas with their RPI 17 and now beating Arkansas twice. What was the expectations going in? And tell us a little bit about this program, because you've been around it here throughout the year.
Well, I got the chance to talk to head coach Jenny Parsons prior to the season, and obviously she's in her 2nd season, but a longtime assistant of former coach Dave Kewen. So keeping that coaching staff together, it's really been continuity over the last couple of years for Central Arkansas, and the expectation was to compete. She told me that when they went into scheduling for this season, the goal was to schedule only teams within the top 150 RPI to make the case for being an at-large bid, and so that the Bears did not have to rely on necessarily getting the automatic qualifier because of the strength of Liberty over recent years. Now, that series is going to be phenomenal. I'm on the call for that. I cannot wait. That's coming up next weekend. I think it'll be phenomenal. All 3 games, I believe, are on ESPN Plus, so make sure you tune in. It's going to be great. But the expectation for Central Arkansas over the last couple of years has been to compete, to be at the top of their league, whether it's the Southland, moving over to the A-Sun. And I was joking with Coach Parsons a little bit. I said, your pitching staff in this days of the transfer portal, how did you keep them? Because I really want to know how they haven't been picked off yet. And she goes, my coaching friends ask me that all the time. They said they kept refreshing the transfer portal over the summer, waiting for Caleb Beaver, for Jordan Johnson to hit the portal. And she said, we've just been blessed with kids that are incredibly loyal and they want to stay here and they want to finish what they've started. This is a program that has continued to be on the come up. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about on Friday's broadcast between Tennessee and Kentucky is Central Arkansas is actually going to be my national storyline. I believe the Bears need more attention. They were receiving votes coming into the polls this week. I think they should be ranked next week, considering they're coming off of a sweep of Arkansas. And for me, they have done enough to garner that national attention.
I think they should have been ranked already. And you're right. Maybe this is the win that puts them over the hump. Sometimes when you're that new school, it takes them a while before you kind of earn the spot. I mean, that's a whole other story. But you're right. That's a big story because they're going to be top 25. And this is a team with two talented arms. I spoke to Jeff Conrad, who's the North Florida head coach, who I've known for a long time. And he told me that facing Central Arkansas, those two arms reminded him of what UCF had with Shelby Turnier, who was an All-American pitcher, and Mackenzie Audis when he was a volunteer at UCF in 2015. He says there's a lot of similar vibes when he faced them and scouting them. So when you got two talented arms, this is a team that someone's not going to be happy to see them in their bracket, I'm sure, come selection Sunday night.
That's a really good comparison. I haven't heard that one yet, but now that you mention it, that's a very fitting comparison. And I think what's the most interesting is as we look at teams across the country, especially in the Power Five programs that are trending more towards a baseball style, where you have a starter, maybe sometimes a middle reliever, and then someone that's been primarily used in a save situation. Central Arkansas is still using their pitchers like 10 or 15 years ago, where you have one really solid arm. They have the benefit of having two, but relying on those two to get you through every single game because there's only one other player that has pitched and has only recorded a single out, not even an inning. So it has been the Beaver and Johnson show to pitch that amount and then to also be that effective. Because when you get in these 3-game series and you're seeing the same pitchers over and over, you have the ability as a hitter to make adjustments. And so that just speaks to the quality of the pitching of both Beaver and Johnson, that they've been able to withstand that level of effectiveness throughout the season.
Tell us about their offense. Is their offense good enough? I've seen a good number of their games that you've called. I've noticed, I remember one game I saw, one of their losses was an extra inning game against Iowa. Iowa has much improved pitching. Renee Gillespie and their new pitching coach, Manley Gardner, they've done a great job improving that Hawkeyes team. And that Iowa's looking better and better each day. That was a really well-played game. But the question I still have about them, do they have enough offense when they play, if they get to the regional or like the Liberty series? That's going to be a big series. Liberty has great pitching. They've been there, done that. That's a monster series. Could be maybe the biggest A-Sun series in a while. What about the offense? Tell us about their offense.
So I think that's the question when it comes to Central Arkansas. Can they put up enough runs on the board to get them to that regional level? The offense is trending in the right direction. It really kind of changed when UCA put Tremere Harris in the leadoff spot. That's when things had clicked. Jenna Wilderman, who's batting in the 9 spot right now, has traditionally been the leadoff hitter over the last couple of years, but is having a high volume strikeout season. And so Coach Parsons decided to flip, but Tremere Harris at the top of the lineup over the weekend against Florida Gulf Coast was 5 for 10. She was on the bases with singles every single time. And then the top 3 hitters in UCA's lineup, it's Tremere Harris, Kylie Griffin, and Maddie Young. We had a graphic for this in last night's game, didn't get to it, but those 3 were, I believe, 14 of 19 in the Florida Gulf Coast series. Don't quite quote me on that because once info goes in, it goes out. But the point was they were hitting above 600, the 3 of them, then drove in probably 75% of the runs over the Florida Gulf Coast series. So that part of the order, fantastic. The bottom half of the order has been a little bit suspect, but the other side of that is Central Arkansas is very comfortable playing those 1-0, 2-1 games. And so the question is, and you kind of saw it with Arkansas last night, when you don't put up the 6 runs a game, what do? How comfortable are you trying to scratch one out? Central Arkansas is very comfortable in that situation. They don't panic a whole lot. They know that they're only going to be playing 1 or 2 run games. And what impresses me most about their offense is they're pretty low strikeout. They put the ball in play and then they use their speed to really apply pressure on the opposing defense.
Tell me about their coaching staff. Obviously, they've done an incredible job. I think they should get some consideration and chatter, at least for national staff and coaches. Just talk. Obviously, you deal with them. Obviously, as you get ready for a broadcast, talk about the staff.
I love Coach Parsons. She's not a big talker. She doesn't want the spotlight on her, doesn't love it, but she's pretty open about her staff, her program, what the expectations are. I've really enjoyed getting to know her a little bit since she's taking over the program, and they're very laser focused. Coach Lucas at third base is always really interesting to listen to because our broadcast booth is right there along the third baseline, and half the time while Central Arkansas is at bat, I can't hear what's going on because Coach Lucas is yelling so much that I can hear her through my headphones. But Coach Lucas, Coach Watford again, Coach Watford coaches first base. Coach Parsons will coach from the dugout on the offensive side. But really, just the continuity of that staff, I think, speaks volumes about the program at Central Arkansas. Because as we know, same with players, when coaches, when you get a core that wants to stay, that's a real indicator of the type of people in the program that you have.
And they seem to have adjusted well to the move to the A-Sun. As you mentioned, the conference change they had to transition. Sometimes it takes a program a little while to adjust. Why has it been so smooth? At least from the outside, it appears it's been a smooth adjustment for them as far as being in the A-Sun.
I think it's also the continuity. I mean, you take a look at the lineup and the coaching staff. It's a lot of the same faces that were there in the Southland. Central Arkansas only graduated a handful of players from a year ago. So or 2 years ago rather. So moving while keeping the same roster, it helps just that comfort level where you don't have to adjust to all new players in new positions and a new conference. You can just kind of stay within yourself and go, hey, I know what we have. Let's just go out and compete. And I also think going back to that, Central Arkansas is always kind of scheduled pretty tough. So when you're spending your non-conference, scheduling Oklahoma State and LSU and Utah, it is certainly, no disrespect to the teams in the A-Sun, but when you are specifically scheduling tough non-conference, it makes that transition a little bit easier.
I agree with that. What's the area of Conway? Are they jumping on the bandwagon there? I mean, it was packed Tuesday night. Obviously, the state of Arkansas. I do a radio hit every so often in the morning shows there at Arkansas, and obviously, I know there's lots of Razorback talk. They always ask me about Courtney Dyfel stuff. But are we starting to get some buzz there for UCA? Because what was the crowd like from that standpoint?
Oh, the crowd was incredible. They announced it at 2,300, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were more that were sneaking inside the parking lot just to kind of be around. I know it was the largest crowd in Ferris Field history, so that's always good to see. And I definitely heard softball talk on morning radio as I was going to my tennis lesson this morning. They had Caleb Beaver on 103.7 The Buzz, which is the primary station here in Central Arkansas. And I would hope now, softball has continued to grow in popularity, as we all know, which is great to see for our sport and the development. And Courtney Dyfel and I talked a little bit about this pregame yesterday as well. The young girls that are coming out now to the games and seeing what's available, seeing the crowds, seeing the level of excitement. And so I hope that this game not just furthers softball for the University of Central Arkansas, but also for the state of Arkansas, because Arkansas kind of lagged behind some of the rest of the states in the early 2000s. They're still playing slow pitch softball here. So they were one of the last states to transfer over to fast pitch. And so I think the success of the Razorbacks, now UCA, Arkansas Tech up in Russellville is a D2 program, very good. They've gone to the D2 World Series, won a GAC title. And so the level of excitement around softball in general here is growing, which is, as a former player, is great to see.
Well, and a big part of that is Courtney Dyfel and the job she's done at Arkansas, because as you know, when she took over that program, they were at the bottom of the SEC. Nobody, thought they could have a shot to win, and she's turned them into a power, which, well, to the point, it's a compliment when they're having the season they're having, and people are kind of concerned about them. That tells you how the bar is so high now. It's a young Arkansas team. You obviously cover them as well. What's your thoughts on the Razorbacks? Obviously, with Dels, they have a young pitching staff behind her. Offense is very young. They had a lot of graduations. Your thoughts on Arkansas here and kind of the peaks and the highs and lows they've had this season?
Well, I think a couple of things are in play. So yes, it's young, but also young in terms of age, but young in terms of not getting a ton of reps, because you look at Rylan Hedgecock, who is now a senior, but she played behind Lenny Malkin and Danielle Gibson. So yes, she is a veteran in terms of her year, but not in terms of her playing experience. Reagan Kramer out in left field last year played a handful of games at second base. So you've got new faces and new positions. You have freshmen such as Rio Johnson in center field, who, by the way, going to be phenomenal. I've been so impressed with Reagan Johnson at the top of that order. She reminds me a lot of Kayla Kowalik. I've said that a couple of times on the broadcast. And so since I'll get to see Kowalik in person on Friday, I'm really excited to see that comparison. But obviously Arkansas is young in the circle this year. They've had to really rely on Shanice Delce in a way they didn't have to a year ago. Now, obviously, she was the SEC pitcher, so you're going to pitcher of the year, so you're going to continue to utilize her as much as you can. But she has thrown a ton of innings and a ton of pitches for them. And so you have to have somebody as that second game. And that's kind of been the up and down area because it was Robin Herron for a little bit. Now it's Hannah Camen's in, kind of coming in with that lefty. Those are both two freshmen that are still getting used to this level where you can't take a pitch off. And that's what's really been the issue sometimes with Robin Herron, is I thought she pitched well last night. She pitched well against Florida in game 2, just made a couple of mistakes. And unfortunately, at this level, hitters are going to be good enough that they take advantage. So that second starter is a situation where Arkansas may not get it figured out this year, but Courtney Deifel is planning forward. And then obviously Hannah Gamble having a season where she's struggling at the plate. Everyone knows how good she is coming off an All-American season. I think if I remember the numbers correctly, hitting 154. I'm not sure if that's the overall or in conference play off the top of my head, but I know it's been a frustrating season for Hannah. And when you have an All-American that's struggling at the plate like that, that also impacts your offensive ability a little bit. So I don't think there's a reason to panic. Obviously, Arkansas knows how to put it together. They're sitting in third in the SEC. Like it's not time to have an absolute meltdown. But our Arkansas fans they're very passionate. I joke a lot about I'm a Kentucky kid. I'm a Kentucky fan at heart because I'm from Lexington. And so Arkansas fans and Kentucky fans are very similar. It's the sky is falling anytime we're losing. So a little bit of perspective is needed here, but they have been some tough to swallow losses. You look at that Thursday game against Georgia, where Arkansas is one pitch away from winning game 1 of that series, and Delce hangs a rise ball in the center of the plate, didn't get it up out of the zone enough, and Jada Kearney takes it out to right field for a 3-run homer, and it changes the entire game and it changes the series. And so Arkansas last year, those games went in the Razorbacks' favor. This year, they're going the other direction. But to Courtney Deifel's credit, she said, these are the games that teach us how to grow. And she felt like her team didn't have that last year until the final 2 games against Texas. And by that time, it was too late to figure out how to self-correct and come away with a victory.
Yeah, I spoke during the post game after they beat Georgia when they won the walk-off, come from behind on Saturday. She admitted with this young group, maybe that Thursday there was a bit of a hangover there, but this is a group that kind of has to figure it out themselves because they're all new. It's not like a veteran team that knows what to do in these situations. You could coach them and tell them the information. They got to figure it out on their own. But as you mentioned, 5 years ago, they would have taken a 3rd place in the SEC.
Well, I've said that on the broadcast too. You take a look at the recent success, and it's easy to forget where Arkansas was, 5 years ago. And I've made the joke, and it's actually kind of true. When I was getting recruited, like I didn't even know Arkansas had a softball program. That's how bad they were. Like it never even registered to me to look at Arkansas as a potential destination. And so to see where they've come and how quickly they've gotten to the top of the SEC, because for me, the SEC is the best conference in the country. So to be able to make those strides against programs that are already established, it is so difficult. And so Arkansas fans have been spoiled a little bit over the last couple of years because the consistency has been just so good.
No question about it. I was speaking with Dorian Craft here on In the Circle. So let's get into a little bit of your broadcasting. But I want to first start because you call both Arkansas and Central Arkansas games. And we're going to get into this because you're kind of a utility. You can do color. Mm-hmm. But you've also done play-by-play. You've done both for Arkansas. I think you've done that for Central Arkansas. It could be, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. You also do a lot of other sports. So I might be confusing the sports because I've joked. I kid you not. I feel like I see you everywhere because I did volleyball this past fall. Mm-hmm. And I swore I saw you at a volleyball call. I'm like, what? I'm like, isn't that the softball? Like, what? So let me start with this. What is it like for you calling a Central Arkansas game, considering you do broadcast both schools? Is that a easy game to do because you know the two teams inside out? Is that a tricky game because you know both teams too well? What is that like for you?
It is the easiest prep that I do all year. Prep takes me the most time out of everything. And so to have two teams, especially ones that I've seen so recently, because we're just coming off the Florida Gulf Coast series, I called the first game of the Arkansas-Georgia series. So I've talked to both coaches, and it's really just kind of a top line, hey, what do we think coming off of this? Any changes? Great. No, we're good. So for me, it's a really seamless transition, which is really nice. But it's to maintain and to stay on top of stuff, it can be a little bit difficult. And to give you a rundown real quick of the sport. So it's football sideline, volleyball play-by-play and analyst, basketball play-by-play and analyst for men and women, and softball play-by-play and analyst.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yes.
So let's get into that. Let's first start with this. You obviously played softball. How did you decide to get into broadcast? Because I know you were a sports anchor too,
I
right?
was, yes, for 10 years. So broadcasting is always what I've wanted to do since I was 9 years old. I tell the story on my job interviews, and it's absolutely true. So I used to wake up, and before school, I would watch Sports Center every morning. And it was back when like Rich Eisen, Stuart Scott, Kenny Mayne, and they would re-show the same hour. So
Yep.
if I had not watched a full hour, my mom was in graduate school at the time and would set an egg timer for me to catch the bus. But if I hadn't watched the full hour, no matter where I started, I would purposely miss the bus so I could watch the rest of the hour of Sports Center. That she was not thrilled, but that's how much I was invested in sports. And, when I was growing up, sideline reporters like Aaron Andrews didn't really exist yet. It was Chris McKendry, Robin Roberts, and Linda Cohn, and that was pretty much it. And so I wanted to be a woman in the industry as kind of a face for the next generation, to prove that women that had played could be there and could be just as knowledgeable as their male counterparts. And so ever since I was 9 years old, this is the only thing that I've wanted to do. It's a tough industry. It will wear you down. It'll break your heart. And I've joked to my parents that sometimes I wish I wanted to be like a banker and just like make it easy on myself. But I've never loved anything else, and I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Yeah, I was Craig Kilborn Sports Center was my favorite that I would watch
Okay.
over and over again. That would re-air. That was people that are some in the audience don't even know what we're talking about because Sports Center now is live all the time. But now
Right.
back then it wasn't. It was a rerun. It was kind of like a big feel good there. Uh, so, but you got into sports anchoring.
Mhm.
So you did that. How long did you do that? And then what made you decide to do play by play and color commentary? How did you get into that?
So I always wanted to work in live game broadcast, but coming out of school, so my degrees aren't in journalism either, which is what's really funny. My mom talked me out of journalism going into college because she said it was too difficult to get into. So my parents advocated for me to go into public relations, and I did. So I have an undergraduate and a master's degree in public relations that I've never used. But I got out of college, and I got a job in like PR marketing for 6 months to a year, and I cried all the way into the office and all the way home every day for a year. And at the time, I was living in California. I moved back to Maryland, and I said to myself, you know what? I can't live with myself if I don't try. And so I emailed all the radio and TV stations in the Baltimore area because I was in Towson, Maryland at the time. Nobody would let me come in because I didn't need an internship because I already graduated my undergrad. And one station, it's WNST, very small AM radio station, let me come in and work for free, essentially. And so I started doing that. Someone that was a morning talk show sports guy was one of the photographers at WBFF in Baltimore. I sat him down one day, told him what I wanted to do. He helped me get in on the weekends to get familiar with how TV worked. We put together a reel. The sports director there knew my first boss in Hagerstown, Maryland. And so I did that for like a year, and a job came open. And so that's how I got into the industry. I was very fortunate to find people that were willing to help. And so once I got in, I was in. And I started doing analyst work for UK softball in 2016 on a very limited basis. But play-by-play came around completely on accident when Little Rock here moved to the ESPN Plus format. Rand Champion, who's no longer with the program, he just left, but he came to me and said, hey, we need a play-by-play, and I think you would be a great fit for women's basketball. I know you've never done it, but we've been impressed by what you've done at THB 11 here in Little Rock, and would you be interested? And I said yes, mostly because I thought it would make me down the road a better sideline reporter, because you have to be live and be in the moment. And it turns out that I really enjoy it and I was good at it, and it's just continued to grow from there.
How quickly did you adapt to play by play?
Um, I remember the first time because I played basketball growing up in high school. I'm a basketball fan. I watch it religiously, and I was like, "Oh, I got this. This will be fine." and I burned through all of my information in like the first quarter. And I got home and my head hurt so badly from trying to focus on the statistics, what was going on, involve my analysts on occasion. Like there is so much. It is sensory overload to do play by play. And so I really kind of realized that, wow, this is a lot harder than what it looks like, because the people that are good at it make it look so simple. And so, from there, it's kind of built. I did get myself a talent coach. I've been working with her for almost 3 years now. And so it's been a learning curve, but, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think I've gotten better at it pretty quickly.
I would say so.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I do remember that too when you did the Kentucky stuff, and then next thing you know, I start seeing you like sprinkle everywhere. Like I think I even remember you doing a MAC game.
Yep. Oh, I got one coming up on the schedule. Yes, I did. I did last year. I did Ball State, Kent State, that whole series, and this year I'm going up to do a midweek doubleheader. It's going to be Miami and Ball State. That's coming up on April 26th.
Oh my goodness. All right. So now we've established you do Arkansas games, you do Central Arkansas. You're doing Tennessee, Kentucky, by the way, this Friday night. That's a big game. We'll
I'm
get
so
to that
excited.
huge series there.
Mhm.
You're doing Missouri State, you said?
Yep. I'll do Missouri State Belmont on the 21st.
So I guess the question that I have, and I think everybody would have, how do you manage all of that? Because that's a lot of teams, not just teams that you're broadcasting the school, the host school, but the opponents are going to be different. So take me through this process. When does it start where you try to map out your schedule? Is it like last minute? Is it months in advance? Take us through this because this is like you've got to be like kind of like on point to make sure you don't overbook yourself.
Right. So I have a giant spreadsheet that I work within. And so it kind of started. This is what I do full time. And I made a commitment. I left my last television job because I want to advance in play by play and analyst work. So I left my job so I could focus on this for a year full time to try to advance myself in this arena, because it just wasn't getting the reps that I needed or that I wanted to really move myself forward. And so this is what I do full time. And so it started with Central Arkansas and Arkansas. I told them I was coming back because Little Rock has been the area where I've had the most work. So they gave me what they needed, and I've kind of built out around that. Little Rock as well. I've filled in um, pretty well with them, with volleyball, with basketball. And so once I had those three schools set, because I knew they were going to be my primary schools, I've looked to add. So Missouri State's not that far. It's only like an hour past Fayetteville, so I can drive. Kentucky is the one outlier, but because I have a relationship with them, I'm always willing to travel. They've been great to me. I'm not going to lie to you. I've tried to add Ole Miss to the schedule. It's just 3 hours away. I've tried to add Memphis. North Texas is not that far. So pretty much I just go about, I consider networking a fine line, between networking and stalking. I'm usually right on it. So I'm just sending out, my reel and being like, hey, I'm Dorian Craft. I'm an ACC champion. I do this, this, and this. Do you have any games that you need someone to call? And so, schools that say yes, I ask them what they need, and so I can fit them around what I have. Ball State is actually one that reached out to me this year because I did work for them last year. They asked if I'd be willing to come back. It's a date that worked, and so it just kind of it goes. The scheduling part is not the hard part. The hard part is remembering the specifics of the conferences, because during basketball season is the hardest because it's men and women for Central Arkansas and Little Rock, where it's very similar. And so there were times during the year I was like, wait, is that OVC or is that ASUN? Like,
Right.
it took me a second on the like I had to, and I'm pretty sure I said stuff wrong during the broadcast, and I would try to correct myself. But keeping the information straight about the conferences is the most difficult thing.
Well, wait till the next couple of years coming with all the realignment. I mean, trust me, it's only going to get a lot
Oh,
trickier now.
I know.
So how much do you self-analyze? How much do you go back and watch your games? Do you have time to do that? And critiquing yourself? Because I do that. I critique myself when I like to watch it right away.
Hmm.
Unless, and there's sometimes when it was bad, you just don't even have to watch it. It was bad. Sometimes you can feel it leaving the box. Sometimes you feel really good about it. And like, I think that was really good. Do you self-critique yourself? How quick do you have a chance to watch some of your games? Especially of the various roles you have. You do sideline, you said, you do color, and play-by-play, three drastically different roles.
Right. So, I mean, three different drastically different roles for two different reasons. One, I feel like knowing every part of a broadcast makes me a better broadcaster because knowing what I need to do as a play-by-play makes me a better analyst because I can seamlessly talk to them because I know what they need from me. And as a sideline, when I have one, I can incorporate them better because, I know what the flow should be. So it makes me more well-rounded, I think. And then also, if anyone comes to me with a position, I can be like, I can be whatever you need. So that's kind of my thought for being all three. But oh, and I'm sorry, what was the question?
Just self-critiquing yourself.
Critiquing myself, yeah. So well, first and foremost, I pay someone to critique me.
Fair,
So
fair.
my coach and I
So you let them, you let the coach watch. There you go.
well,
Okay.
I when I'm in a game, and there are sports that are easier than others. So softball, I'm keeping my book, and I'm typically taking notes. Like last night, and I changed the way I do it. I haven't found one for softball that I really love yet. But in between innings, I'm going back and I'm starring at bats that either I think I did well to show her or things that I messed up on. So, for example, last night we had that very complicated double play that had to be looked at by replay to determine whether or not there were two outs. And Matty Young did end up tagging Callie Kildow and then tossing over to second for the force out of Rio running to second. But that was an elongated play that was very confusing. And so to try to explain that as we're walking through it, plus it's an extended time. So that's a lot of time you got to fill. So like I'll mark something like that in the moment. So I know I want to go back and look at it and then look at it with my coach. And we mark good things and bad things because we want to pick out good things for a demo reel to send out to people. And then obviously if I'm having things where I'm struggling on, to be honest, I feel like I've struggled a little bit with replays at times this year. So I'll mark those and be like, how can I do this better? And so how quickly I can watch it depends on how much else I have going on. So to have 4 games in the span of 5 days, I haven't had a ton of time to go back and watch. Now I do have all the games downloaded onto an external hard drive. I will go back and watch them when I have time. But a lot of times we do one game at a time. So I pick my best one and I go with the clips from there.
Preparation. No, I appreciate you sharing that because I think the audience would be fascinated. And I think the other part is preparation. You and I know that's a big part of this. You, though, take it to a different level because you're doing multiple schools. You're driving different places. Like there was that one weekend you did, I think, the Arkansas, you mentioned it, Arkansas, Georgia. Then you drove to Conway to do Central Arkansas, Florida Gulf Coast Series.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
That's not the worst week I've had either.
All right, give me the worst one. Give me the worst one.
So the worst one this year in terms of crazy scheduling was the Woo Pig Classic when I was the play-by-play. I did a doubleheader play-by-play on Friday in Fayetteville, spent the night, drove to Conway to be the analyst on the Iowa
I remember that. I watched that Iowa game. Yeah.
CA game, right? And so I spent the night at my house in Little Rock and the next morning drove back up to Fayetteville to be the play-by-play on the final game of the Woo Pig.
That's right. And for those that may not know, because Arkansas, it just worked out because Arkansas didn't broadcast that Saturday, correct?
They had taken that Saturday off, which is why I was able to slide in for UCA because we were supposed to do the 2 games on the Woo Pig on that Saturday, which I was initially scheduled for. But as soon as it opened up, I said, "Hey, I'm available," because I don't know how to say no to things.
Obviously, no, we don't know. We don't know.
My own fault.
So, how do you get prep done?
So the hardest part of prep typically comes at the beginning of the year. So I have, and every sport differs by the prep. And I actually think that softball probably has the hardest prep because it's so long and you need so much information. Like somehow basketball actually tends to be the easiest because it's so fast. You can have like not lesser information, but everything is like right in front of you. During softball, I'm flipping through the notes constantly, but I build master boards for myself that have the top line statistics. So for example, I'm actually working on the Tennessee one. That's what I was doing before we hopped on here. And it has like for the team, the batting average, runs, RBIs, etc. The numbers in conference play, ranking in conference versus national ranking versus last year, so that I know where they are now. Are they doing better or worse in conference play? How does that stack up against the rest of the conference nationally? And are they doing better or worse than last year? And so then I take the top 9 or 10 in the batting order. And I have places where I can write information that I get from the coaches' calls or the notes in those boxes. And then I repeat that for the pitching staff. So I'll have, have that for the pitching staff with the overall stats, and then broken out by pitcher with a scouting report. Any notes on the coaches are at the bottom, and then I've started adding like RPI as we get closer to the tournaments. At the top, I have notes for history of the program. So again, and Tennessee, 18 straight NCAA tournaments, 7 Women's College World Series, national championships. So I have that and last year's schedule. And so I make those. I have the master ones, obviously, for Arkansas, UCA. Those just get updated as we go along. And then I make new ones as for every team that comes in. And so I've gotten it down to the point. So typically at the beginning of the year, it takes me 8 hours to prep per game, just because I want to get in depth. I can cut that down as we continue to go through. And obviously, there's some games that I'll spend more time on. Like I haven't really seen Kentucky or Tennessee much this year, so I'm spending a lot of time. If it's a team that I've seen peripherally, I can spend a little bit less time because I already know some things that have been said on the broadcast. But I would say that typically, and 90% of my time is spent in prep. Of the prep, I will only use about 10% during the
Oh
day.
yeah, it.
Because I mean, you can prepare for a ton of stuff, but you have the beauty about a live game broadcast is you have no idea how it's going to turn out. So you don't know what's going to be relevant and what's not.
Especially in softball, where a game can end abruptly in 5 innings on a run rule, and you're all of a
Right.
sudden like, "Wait a minute, we didn't get to talk about this," or a
Right.
pinch runner deals there. So for example, when you have a week like you're preparing for an Arkansas tournament, like you mentioned, then you're doing UCA, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Do you plan it out as I'm going to use this day to focus on this particular broadcast and the next day on the other broadcast? Do you try to do an hour on both games in the same day? How do you go about it when you have multiple events in the same way? And have you ever had a situation where you had to do, for example, basketball and softball in the same week, like I've had to do in the past?
Yes.
Okay.
Crossover season is the worst
Yeah.
because you have 10,000 things. I've even done multiple sports on the same day. And that was going from basketball to high school football, which is a little bit easier because with high school, there's not quite the amount of prep that goes into that for a high school sideline. But I've done that too. So it depends on how I feel about stuff. For the Woo Pig, since we're using that as an example, what I actually tried to do first is I built my boards out totally for all teams that were involved. So at least I had the basis of information. And then I went about filling them in day by day. So for example, I had, was it Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, and North Texas on the first day. So I built out boards for the entire weekend. And then I said, okay, well, these are my 2 first games. So this is my priority here. And I worked on those first. Once I got those out of the way, I turned to Iowa and Central Arkansas because I had an extra day there. Plus I had some morning time. So I typically go by what's coming first on the schedule. Just because I have to, I would love to focus my attention on if it's a bigger matchup, but I also have to give the same amount of attention to every single game. And that's one of the things that I think I do best is I treat UCA Florida Gulf Coast like it's Oklahoma UCLA. It's all the same to me. Everyone deserves the same amount of respect and coverage.
I agree, and that's kind of in a way those are always they're always more creative because there's like, okay, what's a good angle to find in this particular game that people may not know about and learn some stuff. I hear you on there 100%. Did you have people you looked up to, either play-by-play people, analysts, sideline, as you grew up, and obviously you wanted to do this for a long time, but who were some of the people that you looked up to?
It's a really good question. And I hesitate to say that I didn't for a long time, just because there weren't that many people that were available, to be quite frank about it. Now that I watch, so Kate Scott is my mentor, the play-by-play for the Philadelphia 76ers. She and I have been, she has been my mentor since 2018. So it's been a while. She and I exchanged texts, last night. And after I got done with the Woo Pig, I texted her and I said, I just called the best game of my life, because I felt really good coming out of that series. And she was like, I'm so happy to see it. So I watch Kate a lot. My talent coach is Jill Montgomery. I've gone back to watch her stuff on ESPN. She was a sideline reporter. She also does analyst work. She's excellent. Beth Mowins, I think you have to put up there because Beth Mowins is kind of, one of the first to do it. The great thing is there are more women that are getting into it. So I've started to pay more attention to the women from the men's side. Tom Hart is a guy that I watch a lot. I love Tom. I've talked to him before. He's a great guy, and I think I always learn something when he does a broadcast. Jordan Rogers is a better analyst than I thought he was going to be quite honest. So I like hearing their rapport. And then this is a little bit outside the parameter, but you and I talked. I play a lot of tennis. I watch tennis. Jim Courier on the Tennis Channel is
Yeah.
excellent. I learn something every single time, and so I kind of mix up my sports. I mix up my genders. Jay Billis is obviously a great. Dan Schulman is excellent.
Sure.
So I watch various sports to pick up what they're talking about, not so much that I can copy, but so that I can listen and think about how I want to incorporate some of the same ways they're talking, information that they're giving into my broadcast when it's relevant.
When I feel like too, like you and I, like tennis is a sport we would like to be part of a broad. Like if somebody can set up a broadcast, I
Yes.
think you and I would be jumping all over. Like I don't have that luxury over here, but we're both kind of waiting for that. Like, hey, give me that opportunity. I'd like to because I feel like you and I have hit it off because I feel like you and I are staying up watching Australian Open at 4 in the morning.
We made my husband a tennis fanatic. He didn't play before he met the family, and now he's texting me about, did you see this about Berrettini? And I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm doing other things, but it's there's a lot of Tennis Channel on in my house, probably more than anything else, which is really shocking. But
Makes sense. It's nonstop tennis there. That usually will be my summer programming. As you know, obviously in the spring, it's a little harder to catch up on the
I'm getting
Miami
very
Open
excited.
or,
Yeah,
it's
I'm getting excited for the French. I know that's coming up. I hope Rafa wins it again. I love Rafa Nadal so much, which is another conversation entirely.
oh, yeah, we'll have to do a separate podcast on our love of Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer. Yeah, yeah.
My
Okay.
husband's
Well,
a Roger guy, so yeah, we'll do that in another hour.
woo! All right. We'll have to do a tennis podcast. So, how did you convince? Because obviously you got into softball commentary. That makes sense. You're a former softball player. Of course,
Mhm,
they give you that opportunity. That makes sense, right? Even basketball. You mentioned you're a Kentucky girl.
mhm.
Like, how are you not like no basketball, right? I'm curious, how did you convince others to do, for example, volleyball, football sidelines? Like, how did you? Because that's you got to it's a competitive business, as you know, competitive industry. How did you convince them? Hey, I'm good enough to do these sports as well.
I got lucky when it came to volleyball. I didn't convince, they asked. They said, are you comfortable doing volleyball? And I said, well, I've never done it, but sure, I'll try. I do have a little bit of an ace in the back pocket. I have twin cousins that are younger than I am, both of which play Division I volleyball. One was a setter at Oregon. The other one started off as a hitter at Western Kentucky, finished out her career at SIUE, and is currently an assistant coach at Villanova. The other one was a coach at Ole Miss and has left the industry now. But when I got into volleyball, they were both still very much in it. And so I would call them and be like, hey, walk me through your film. Like they actually broke down the same film that they go through their players with for me. So they could walk me through what was going on. And the coach at Ole Miss, when I did my first Kentucky Tennessee volleyball match, that was really helpful because she had a full scouting report already. And so she just sent that my way. But, I've gotten some really lucky breaks, which, in this industry, a lot of times it comes down to it because there's a lot of talented people. And a lot of times it just comes down to who you know or when the opportunities come your way. So people ask me about volleyball, which is how I did that. And then I have banged on the doors of people to let me do football for a while, but it just so happens that it's a school where people know me and they know the work that I did here locally, and I've done other work for them. And so I already kind of had that relationship. And so that's how that happened. So again, it all comes down to luck.
Oh, hey, sometimes that's how this works in this industry. Trust me,
Yeah.
it's the right time, right place. All that. You obviously enjoy all the roles you have and all the sports you do. That being said, is there one, like, for example, sport that you feel the most comfortable, or you say, this is a perfect, I feel comfortable here as play by play. I feel comfortable as an analyst in this sport. I feel really comfortable doing sideline in this sport. Is there any preference from that standpoint?
I think this year, well, first and foremost, I think softball is my biggest comfort level because it's where I played the highest level of the sport. So I have a more complete understanding of it inside and out. So both being an analyst and a play-by-play in that arena is where I feel most comfortable. Weirdly enough, the games that I felt the best about this year have actually been as play-by-play. I've come away from some analyst work being like, I'm really happy about that, but I'm also super critical of myself. Like, unless it's perfect, I'm usually not happy with the broadcast. Like, unless I sound like Tom Hart or Joe Buck, I'm like, that was terrible. So, but for me, I think softball play-by-play is probably where moving forward I would love to be the most. But also, my history has taught me that I'm not going to say no to anything.
No, you
So
can't. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. You
yeah.
can't in this history. How much did your athletic background, being a high level player, Division I player, and what comes with that, not only being a great athlete, but the discipline that comes with being an athlete, how much is that is part of your broadcasting in a lot of ways?
Everything that I have learned in terms of hard work and time management, all the things that have to go into this field, I learned as an athlete. I was always fairly gifted athletically, which, always is part of it, but I was also a hard worker. I used to go to the batting cages for 2 hours after practice just because I wanted to be better. And I feel that way also about broadcasting. There are people out there that are better than I am. There are people out there that are working just as hard as I am, and so I am continually putting in the work to be the best. And I'm not there yet. I may never get to be the best, but I'm going to put in as much effort as humanly possible, which is the thing that I can control. And something, it's a life lesson. It's not just this industry. Something that took me a long time to accept is that the only thing that I can control is what I put into this. I can't control whether or not someone listening thinks I'm good. I can't control whether or not, I ever get a big contract, but I can control the effort and the care that I put into something. And all of that started, from being an athlete.
How much of that too helps you in that, you're doing all these broadcasts with different productions, different production budgets, different producers, different directors, different play-by-play people if you're the analyst, or different analysts if you're
Mhm.
the play-by-play. So there's a lot of different moving parts there. How do you adapt to all of that and not get, because sometimes you can fall into a trap where you're used to a certain way, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we kind of do it this way. Like there's a lot of different ways to do this, and not every school can do it a certain way. So how do you adapt to that?
I think the most important thing is communication with everybody on your team. Rising tides lift all ships. Yes, when you're doing a broadcast, the only people that you see are the play-by-play and the analyst, but there are so many people that are back in the production room or the truck that they roll out on the cameras down on the field that make a production work. And so it's really a team effort. And so what I have found the most is that communication from the beginning is the best way to ease through all of that stuff. We typically start communication threads. We'd like to start them a week before the broadcast. With the amount of games that you have in a softball season for this, it's typically a couple days out, but we'll hop on a production meeting. We'll start emailing graphics that we want to use or things that we want to hit on during the broadcast so that by the time we get to the field, all of that's already ironed out. In the broadcast, I'm consistently talking in between innings with whoever I'm broadcasting with, whatever side, and I'm going, hey, is there something you want to talk about? Hey, I want to talk about this. Am I talking too much? Are you good with how this is going? That kind of stuff. So it's a constant conversation off the air as well, so we can keep things smooth on the air. And so, and that conversation also extends to my producer who's back in the booth. Can we hit this? Can we do that? Like, I'm not a huge fan of that shot. No, we don't need to talk about that. So, and they're doing the same for me. They're letting me know things that are coming up or that they want to use. And so really the amount of communication, like I would also say that we talk more off the air than we
Yeah.
actually talk about a game that's on the air.
Well, I wondered, did it ever interest you of maybe working like producer, director behind the scenes? Because you've done sports. You always just want to do on air. You want to do live,
Yeah,
right?
I did. I always wanted to be on air, which is funny that I didn't want to be behind the scenes because I like to be in control of things. I'm very type A, but no, I always wanted to be on camera.
I feel like every broadcaster has to be somewhat a bit of a control person, right? Like
I
I
think
don't
we
think you
are,
can
yeah.
be without being a broad. That's part of it is, especially in the versatile roles. All right, and we'll see. All right, so tell us again. Tell the audience your schedule coming up here that you're allowed to share with us.
Sure.
starting obviously, and I want to ask you first. Let me just start with this. Obviously, Tennessee, Kentucky. I know you're prepping for it as we talk, so I'm not going to
Yep.
ask you for breakdown of this. But I mean, you don't have to, do prep to know this is a big series. Tennessee's having a great year. They're right now on top of the SEC. Kentucky, Rachel Lawson and company. They've had some injury issues, but they're trying to move themselves up. You've got national seed implications, SEC championship implications, hosting implications. I mean, that's going to make that. I know it's a long drive, but that probably gets you through that drive, doesn't it?
I'm so excited. I compare this, and you'll probably hear me say this on the broadcast. This is the equivalent of like a Duke, North Carolina, where they're both ranked, because Tennessee, Kentucky, they're bitter rivals. They're not that far apart. And Kentucky fans love to beat Tennessee. Like, that is something that they love. And if you've ever watched Kentucky and Tennessee basketball or football, you know Rocky Top feels the exact same way. And so this is transferred over to Diamond Sports as well. And so I'm very excited to see this. Obviously, I watched Ashley Rogers throw against Virginia Tech last night. Very impressive. I'm kind of hoping that they throw Peyton Gottschall on Friday. I got to see Peyton throw last year for Bowling Green before she transferred. So I'd like to see her out in the circle. She's got an incredible rise ball. It is ridiculous. It is so fun to watch. But really, I just think the series is going to be kind of scratch it out. I think this is not going to necessarily be lopsided. I think this is going to be a really close series. Kentucky, they've had the injury issues. You look back at the Texas A&M series, I think surprised a lot of people with how lopsided that series was. But Kentucky knows how to get it back at the time is right. Rachel Lawson is very experienced. She's done great things because, similar to Courtney Deifel, before Coach Lawson got there, Kentucky was also at the bottom of the SEC. And so those are two coaches that have really elevated the level of their programs, have been able to sustain it year after year. And you don't do that without knowing how to get your team to compete and to execute at the right times. And so I think this series is really shaping up to be one of the best in the conference this year.
Does your softball background too make it easier when you talk to these coaches because they know who you are? And is that something you have to overcome when you've done volleyball? Is that at all? Is that a hurdle at all that, maybe they don't know you as well when you first started doing it? Because, you didn't play volleyball, you played softball. And they're like, wait a minute, we got the softball. Was that a challenge at all?
No, well, yes and no. So the way to get around that is to ask intelligent questions. And so you really have to do your research at the beginning. And actually, the coach that I was the most nervous about, I hope he doesn't mind me saying anything, Todd Kowalczyk, the men's basketball coach at Toledo. I was nervous talking to him the very first time. And so I made sure that I did some research. And the very first, I typically don't ask, how do you feel? What do you think? I ask very specific questions regarding statistics and performance. And I asked Coach Kowalczyk at the time, and I said, your defense is, there was a field goal percentage shooting defense question. And he was just like, thank you. And I was like, yes. So I really try to do some research into the statistics to prove to them. And I don't know how much they read into it or not. To prove to them that I've at least done the background before I'm coming into our meeting, so that I already have some air of not intelligence isn't the right word, but I have some credibility.
Sure,
when
absolutely.
into our conversations.
No, absolutely. That's the thing, right? You go the extra mile there, and they can see that, everybody from a mile away. So you got Tennessee, Kentucky. Are you with Dave Baker?
I am. I love Dave.
See, I know my broadcasters. I know Dave Bacon. I know the crew's there. That's a big one Friday. And then you said earlier you got Liberty, Central Arkansas, which is holy smokes. That is, again, I'm telling you, I'm not trying to hype it up just because you're on the air, but that's seriously one of the most biggest A-Sun series in recent memory with Liberty, the way they've handled the A-Sun and Central Arkansas now. It's like a collision course.
Yes. Dot Richardson, also the only coach I've ever fangirled over, because I called the game where they knocked off Arkansas 2 years ago in Fayetteville. And funny story real quick, I actually have a signed medical journal article from Dot Richardson. My dad's a physician, and he and Dot Richardson ended up sitting next to each other on a plane, like back in 1998 or 2000. Yeah. And they got talking about medical stuff, not softball, medical stuff. And then he casually mentioned, I think he was flying to one of my tournaments from work, and he casually mentioned that that's what he was doing. And she was like, oh, well, I played softball, and my dad's not going to recognize Dot Richardson. And then she introduced herself. And so she signed my dad's medical journal article, which I still have in my parents' house some way. I told her that story. She did not remember, but absolutely lost my mind about Dot Richardson. But yeah, so that series is going to decide who wins the ASUN. So I'm very excited about that. Obviously, we talked about Tennessee, Kentucky. Also throw in there Missouri State, Belmont on Friday the 21st, and then I will wrap up that schedule with the 26th, which is the Ball State, Miami. I do have something coming up in May. I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything yet, so I won't say it, but there is something which is it's big for me. I'm very excited about it. Coming up the second week of May.
Oh, I look forward to hearing about that. And Belmont, Missouri State, that's the Valley, the expanded Valley this year. You talk about challenges now, is remembering who's the new members and the old members
Right?
in the Valley this year.
I write myself cheat sheets, and so it's funny, if you ever come into the booth after I work, it will look like that meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia where he has everything taped up and like string, because I paper the walls of the booth with, I'll have the rosters, I'll have the stats, I'll have handwritten notes that I make on cards. Everything is taped up. It's just wall to wall. And then Dave rolls in with like his iPad and he's like, I'm good. And I've got everything covered.
Yes. No, I'm like Dave. See, I'm like Dave because when I started in UCF broadcasting, our press box, let's just say, is not the biggest. And this was pre-ESPN Plus days. They used to have a big camera right next to me on the window in the broadcast. One camera shot, the old traditional route, right? So I had no room. So I had to learn to basically have one sheet of paper, notes, and then my laptop. That's it. And people, my analysts, they think I'm nuts because I'll talk about a lot of different stuff that happened years ago in the matchup. I'll bring up certain stats, and they look at it as like, where are you getting this from? I don't see this in your notes. And what I do is, I don't know if you're the same, I have to write everything down. I write bullet points. It triggers a memory in my brain.
I'm the exact same way. So I actually, I didn't do it for basketball because it's just, the sport is too fast and it moves too fast. And I haven't had the time to do it during softball because of the volume of what I do. Oh, I also did soccer this fall. That was a disaster. I forgot about that entirely.
Okay.
I hand wrote my boards for volleyball and soccer for that exact reason, because when I write stuff down, it triggers stuff in my memory and it sticks, which is why I've come up the boards I do for softball now, where I have the big stuff that's printed out and then I'll go in and I'll hand write my notes. And I'm kind of the same way. I have a terrible memory for like stuff like people's names or important things. But I can tell you random softball facts from like 5 years ago. I don't know why it's still in my brain, but it is. So I'm kind of the same way.
Yeah, archives, and as people have described me in the brain. Now, I totally get that. Well, this has been a blast. I've really loved talking to you. I've wanted to talk to you, as you know. Obviously, we've had to work around your schedule, rightfully so, because you are. I'm not sure there's many people that are as busy as you are this time of year. What you're doing, but I admire what you're doing. I'm a big fan, and I'm so happy to get you on the show. Definitely want to get you back.
Yes.
If there's ever if by any opportunity that you actually have a light schedule, which I don't think exists in your world, but if it does, we'll figure it out.
Right now it'll be after the last week in May, because I've got nothing on the books for June, July, and the majority of August. So
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know if I like that yet or not. So
You like it when you're thinking, oh, I'm exhausted, but then like you get to June and July, you're like, well, I got nothing to do. What am I supposed to do?
also the paycheck. I would like the paycheck to keep coming. So.
All right. Well, then I'll maybe get you back around that time. If I didn't talk to you before, then we'll get there and then we'll break down Wimbledon, maybe preview.
Oh, yes, I'm in.
All right, Dorian Craft, check her out, ladies and gentlemen. Tell the audience where they can find you on social media there and follow your work.
Follow me on Twitter at Dorian Craft, and I've been terrible about posting on Instagram, but I do on occasion. It is at Dorian Craft TV.
All right, Dorian Craft, everybody. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.